Good evening, church family. I'm so excited that you could join us. This is not an ordinary meeting. This is a very special event and a cause to celebration for sure. As you might have heard through the grapevines, Tyler wrote a book. Come on, in and of itself, it's already cause for celebration. But I just wanted to share a little bit with you guys, one, some of the behind the scenes and the content of the book, but also one of the reasons why I'm so excited about it. So hold on tight. When you think about it, as humans, we're naturally drawn to stories, right? That's what kind of moves us forward. And you think of the Bible, it's a book full of stories about God and just ordinary people who dare to say yes to His invitation. And if you walk with Jesus long enough, naturally you will be telling stories that make no sense unless God is in it. But what gets me the most excited about this book is the fact that it's filled with stories from our community. Very own stories that we're sick and tired of telling each other. No, we're not sick and tired because we just love telling stories about the things that God is doing. But think about it. Now they're written down. And can I say so? They're written down the most eloquent way possible because our brother has a way with words. I got to tell you that. But honestly, I get excited thinking about the way God is breathing new life into these stories. It's one thing that we can share it with one another, but it's another thing that I can think of. Someone is going to pick up this book somewhere across the world and I'm actually going to read about something that God did within us. And I know that God's already using that in such a powerful way. So that just gets me excited to think about that. I know the stories that we've lived because of God is going to impact someone that we'll probably never meet. Have you thought about this? This is just God can do this. So anyways, I'll stop rambling and let me just get us through the evening, what we're going to hear tonight. So we're going to hear a little bit about the story of the book. Patrick is going to interview Tyler, which is going to be a good thing. And we're going to hear also some stories from the book. As you guessed it, we're going to have some familiar faces from our community sharing a little bit about it. We're going to have some reading and a Q&A with the altar at the end. So hold on tight. And last but very not least, if you're just like me and you just can't help but I need to get his hands on this book. This is amazing. What's happening? Where can I find it? The official release is not until March, but for our church community, it's being released a month earlier. So as of right now, you can go on our website, oaksbk.church/book, and purchase a copy for you and for someone else. And the best thing is that all the proceeds for this first month are actually going to go to our Justice and Mercy Fund, which funds things like the food pantry and our community renewal projects. So, without further ado, here's our evening.
The Western world is decades into what sociologists term the age of anxiety. That diagnosis holds up in the pews of the church and at the cafe table outside. Both inside and outside of the community of faith, this age of anxiety has dealt us the same hand. If there really is a God of unquenchable love, a completely fulfilling mission, a life raft for the pain I'm drowning in, introduce me. Searching for Enough is a book written in 3 parts. Part 1, the story of the world, is an attempt to address the most universal and the most personal questions, written with the broadest audience in mind: devoted Christians, convinced atheists, and half-hearted agnostics. Part 2, the story of Jesus, is an introduction to the first-century Jewish peasant who never wrote a book or held an office, died in poverty, abandoned by all of his followers, and still somehow became the most influential figure in history. Who is this Jesus, and why bother with him? Part 3, the story of Thomas, is an introduction to the life of the disciple known as the twin. You may be surprised to discover that Thomas's doubt is not a pitfall to avoid, but a pathway to follow to encounter with the living God.
All right, my friend, this is interview number 4. We're like a regular Frost Nixon. All right, so I'm excited about this one, though. We get to talk about this book, which you've gotten to do once, but as I've now have it in my hands, and I've been reading it. I'm excited to talk even more about it. So, first question, let's just dive right in. How much
Yeah.
did they pay you to write this? Okay, you can go back to that one.
Yeah, I'm investing in a vacation property
I see.
on foreign soil, if that answers your question.
Hopefully not Russia. But the reason I actually want to ask you is because I have seen something. Gemma mentioned it this morning a little bit, and I've seen behind the scenes that you have been walking this tension between the anxiety of people wrongly assuming that this book is about profit or notoriety or fame and how it's going to be received, and also the hope that people will receive it in the intention, which is an encapsulation of the people of our church, this kind of seminal word that God has like placed on your heart, and that it will be a blessing to those both in the church and outside of the church. So I get that, and that's why my question is, putting everyone else aside, what does this book mean to you?
I preached an Easter sermon here one Sunday, and I saw people come to faith. And I had a number of people in this church thank me for it and name specific things from it. And sometimes that happens, and they're kind of complimenting the rhetoric of what you said or the eloquence, but people like had emotion on their faces as they remembered certain parts of it. And it wasn't right after the talk. It was like a while later. So I could see that there was a deep work God was doing. And that was just encouraging. And then a month or so passed, and I was biking home from work one day, and God brought that back to mind. And I felt like the Spirit of God just said, write it down. And I had never really wanted to write a book. Occasionally people would ask me, like, do you think you write a book one day? And my answer was always like, no. There's way too much noise out there already in like Christian literature. I don't want to add to the noise. Maybe when I'm like 65, I'll have something with enough wisdom behind it to actually write it down and say. And I felt like God was saying, write it down. And then I did, and I had a lot of fun doing it. And so I think this book to me is an act of obedience. It's a gift that God wants to give from this community to the broader church. And so I just want to offer it. And the temptation for me is to either try to like distance myself from it and be like, no, it's not what you think. I don't want to be an author. I'm just a pastor. Or to try to grab hold of it now at the end and be like, well, I need to promote this and make it matter. And the invitation from God continues to be like, I asked you to do this, and I'll use it for what I want to use it for. And so I guess it means to me an act of obedience and just another step on this journey with Jesus I've been on that is so abundant every step of the way that I'm now like, how in the world did I get to write something down? And then an agent reached out to me, and like this whole thing accidentally happened. And I talked to people that have been trying to publish books, and they're like, what? How did that happen? And it just seems like, I don't know, God's just opened some doors, and he must have something from this community he wants to share with his bride across this country or across the Western world. And so hopefully we get to take that in. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I saw the Graham and saw the prophet Simon say that it was going to go far, be a bestseller. So I heeded
I didn't know he
words.
said that, but thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Hopefully that was prophetic.
I'm curious, when you look back over this book, there are a lot of words in here, and I'm wondering like which ones were the hardest to write.
You know, the reading that I'm going to do in a few minutes was the hardest part to write, because it was the part of my story that has been too personal to fully share in a sermon or something like that, because other people's stories are wrapped up in it, and because it's about pain that I've faced as a pastor and doubt that I've wrestled with as a pastor. And I think that when you're leading a community, you have to tie a bow on everything, or it sometimes feels like you have to. Like you can't just put your stuff out there unresolved. That's irresponsible in some way. And so, but your life continues going on. And so you go through things with God that don't line up with the story you believe to be true about the world. And there's tension there. And all of our faith journeys go through ebbs and flows with that tension. But it's a unique thing to go through that kind of tension while you're leading a community, while you're immersing yourself in the story of Jesus, telling others the story of Jesus week after week. And so, yeah, those words in particular, I can remember sitting in front of my computer and getting emotional while I was writing them, because it was just waking back up the feelings that I had at this moment in my own journey.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually really looking forward to that, because I hope I'm not stepping on that moment, because there's a question I've been wanting to ask ever since our last talk about this on the podcast. Because I asked you a question, and you answered it very eloquently, but you also did not answer my question.
Okay.
And the question was, the big thesis of this book, that kind of like seminal statement that appears time and again and opens the book, is it isn't enough. And when I asked you in the podcast, I was like, what do you know, Tyler Staten, what do you know of those words, it isn't enough, in your own life? You told a very great story about someone else who went through some hard time. And so I want to come back and give you another chance to answer that question. What do you know? And I've heard you recently tell some stories that lets me know you haven't answered this, but what do you know of those words? It isn't enough.
Yeah, I mean, this church is so special. And what God is doing among us is supernatural and real and holy. And all of that gets traced back in my version of the story to coming to the end of myself. And that happened after about 2 years into this church, the two safety nets that I had both fell apart. And one was in the form of this larger family of churches that we were a part of, and one was in the form of some other people that I was working with. And I saw the larger family of churches come apart and our staff team be dwindled down to 2, all in the matter of months. And I was just like out there on my own. And who we were was a reflection of my weaknesses. And I was trying so hard to white knuckle this thing into being something beautiful. And I was crafting words to preach, and I was thinking about moments, and I was meeting with everyone I could think of to have coffee with, and then I kept on reading the New Testament, and I was just like, this is different than what I'm doing. Whatever I'm doing is different than what God is doing on these pages, and that sent me on this journey of kind of unraveling, and in my weakness, discovering God in a new way. And that, there's a number of stories that were critical along the way there. A lot of friendships from the UK came about during that time. The story I was telling you the other day was getting to sit with this man named Barry Kissel, who's in his 80s, that was a part of a real revival within the Anglican Church in the UK. And him telling me stories from his life and just saying, will you please lay your hands on my head and just pray an impartation? I want to live the sort of life you've lived. I want to get to 80 and share those kind of stories. And I just felt like God answered those prayers. And I've gotten to be on this, I went from trying really hard to do something to like being swept. I was like riding a wave. I've been riding this wave of like, man, there's nothing like following Jesus. There's nothing like following Jesus. This is so fun. And so I think the way that I was trying to pastor brought me to this isn't enough. Like, I have a holy discontent that the people in this church have to be experiencing more than this because Jesus is more than this. And I have to be experiencing more than this because this isn't what I'm seeing on the pages of Scripture. And that hunger, I think, stripped away a lot of false self that I was trying to clothe myself with and left me free to experience God in a deeper way. And so I think that most of what's on these pages has come out of that experience, though I don't write about that experience, but it's the overflow of that.
That's great. Sounds much better. Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Take two.
Yeah. Last question. There's a quote in here I wanted to read because I really feel like it's a section where I think people are going to read it and they're going to be like, man, I really wish he'd given a little more on that. So just want to give you the opportunity. Feel free to pass.
Yeah.
But it's near the back. You say, thank you to my team at Oaks Church, Brooklyn. And you say, Patrick, for warning me about the dangers of acronyms. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity if you wanted to, give a little more insight into that.
I can try to do that while keeping this program family friendly.
Please don't get us fired. Yeah.
Yeah. Patrick has been a part of a cultural education for me in a variety of ways. The Jordans were very important. We all know that. But I was designing a preaching class for our pastoral team about 1 month into your employment here. And I was using an acronym repeatedly in the outline of that preaching class to refer to a very important part of crafting a sermon. However, that acronym also is the title of a very popular hip-hop song, and it means something very explicit to most of the world who
Quite
isn't
different.
me. Yeah, and ever since that moment, I've just stayed away from acronyms entirely because you just can't trust them. So that's probably the most information I can give on that story.
That's pretty good.
But it's a huge contribution you've made to my life.
Yeah, thank you. Great. All right, well, my story isn't the only one that's in these pages. We also have the stories of some other people that have been dear to our church and are still dear to our church. And so why don't we just take a moment and go now to you and those people just unpacking some of those stories.
All right, I am here with a very familiar face, Miss Jasmine Andujar, longtime member of our church community, founder of Single Moms of Brooklyn, person I admire the most in the world, potentially. So, Jasmine, thanks for joining me. I got a really amazing story that I was able to share in this book that I've just written that you were a part of. So, in a portion of the book, I'm talking about community and the sort of community that we're meant to both be and experience in the church. And when the scripture says God is love, it actually says God is agape, which is this familial sort of love. It is experience when it's shared across all the lines that divide our society, like racial and socioeconomic lines and everything like that. And when I think about agape, the most stunning picture I have ever seen of it came because of you. So when Kirsten was pregnant with our first child, Hank, Jasmine, you kept telling me, oh, I want to have you guys over for dinner. I want to have you guys over for dinner. And then we worked out this one Saturday afternoon to come over for dinner. And when we got there, knocked on the door and you threw it open to like a surprise, and there's tons of people from our community packed into your place, and you had thrown a surprise baby shower for us. So I want to get a little of the backstory, which I've never actually asked you. Can you tell me, like, when did that idea come into your head? What made you think to do that? How did you execute it? All those things.
So, when I found the church, I was going through a hard time with my oldest son, Justice. And when we figured out that this was like the church for us, I tried to treat it like trying to be very open to like whatever was going to happen at church for me, because I'm a really private person, and it was hard to be that at church because everybody was like, hi. So we went into it like as open as possible, and I really felt like I found another family, and a family that I felt truly loved me and my boys. And I kind of just wanted to give back what I felt like was given to me and my boys. And I wanted to do that for you guys. So it was hard to hang out with you guys because she was pregnant, and then she had the baby. So I said, okay, so I was speaking to my friend Liz, and I said, I think it'd be really cool if we did like an after baby shower. I've never done one of those, just thought it would be cool to do it. And I wanted it to be with the new friends that we had made. And then I also kind of knew you guys also had close relationships with them as well, so that it can be like intimate and special. I figured I didn't want to throw more things at you guys that you probably didn't need. So I thought maybe we can just gift books, baby books. And
I remember
instead of
that.
giving you cards where you just throw them out or they take up space, everyone will write like a message in the book that they gifted. And the books could be like used or new, whatever it was. So that was the concept. I'm giving you guys this after baby shower. And I also love to like decorate parties. So I thought that was cool too. So I just kind of would have like this idea to just be creative and love on you guys. I feel like the way you guys loved on me and the boys. And it also just gave me an opportunity to kind of like open my door. And that like, for me, made it like really personal, because I just don't invite anybody to my home where my children are. And when I started like telling everybody, you know, hey, I have this idea, they finally agreed to a date. I would love for you guys to join, but it's a secret. And everybody kind of was like, yeah, okay, cool. And I said, awesome. Kids are welcome. You know, I have kids in the house. Your kids are welcome. It's not a big home. So, but, you know, we can do it. And then it was executed. And it was amazing to see your guys' face.
Yeah, that's the only time in my life I've ever had like a true like sitcom surprise party moment, you know. But yeah, I want to ask you, you know, I know you well enough to press you for specifics and to say these things. So I want to ask you about letting everyone into your home, because, you know, Jasmine, you live in government subsidized housing, and you're a part of this new community. And I can remember the picture, like just to paint the picture for those who weren't there. I remember walking in and seeing faces from our church, and there's people that I know that like, you know, live in brand new luxury buildings on the waterfront, and there's people that work in tech and are barely making ends meet, waiting tables. And it was just like, it spanned the socioeconomic spectrum. And then there's also people of so many different cultures. You know, we're in a building that is predominantly Hasidic Jewish community. You and Liz have prepared a Puerto Rican feast for all of us to eat. And it was like people of every shade, every different age bracket, and you brought those people together. And that was vulnerable for you to do, because you were sharing your culture with us. You're also opening your home to us. So did you feel any sense of insecurity that you had to overcome or anything like that to kind of make yourself vulnerable to this new community?
I mean, when Liz and I spoke about it, it made sense to be more in my home than hers, because it sounds funny, but my home was actually bigger than her home. Her home is like railroad style. Mine was more like a kind of open, squarish thing going on. But I did, because I had been to like some of those homes already, and that was an experience for me that I never had in my life. I never knew someone personally that lived in a home that I saw in like TV, you know? But it was also the first time that I had stepped into a building and I didn't feel judged. And I feel like that helped me to be vulnerable, to allow them to come into my home and kind of just see how it went.
Yeah,
and
this is who I am. You just show yourself.
And it it was a pretty cool experience because I remember Simon saying, well, let me get the tour. And I cracked up laughing because it wasn't much of a tour. He genuinely wanted the tour, you know, and it felt good because he really was like, and it didn't feel like it was coming from like a nosy place. It was more like, wow, like I'm in your home, you know, like you let me in your home. I just want to see. And it was cool. And it was cool to see that they liked my space, you know, and I feel like it was more in my head, the thoughts of what they might have thought or what I was going to feel than what they've always shown me from the very beginning.
So, man, that gives me so much hope. Yeah, I just want to, I'll land us here by just saying what I remember. I remember everyone gave books, and you gave a book too, and I had all these books with people from our community who had written notes to little Hank, you know, who we were going to watch grow up and be formed. And you gave me a pair of Jordan Brand infant socks. And I remember those because I never would have picked them out myself, but they were yours. And so every time I slipped those socks onto his feet, I would remember that the family that Hank is growing up in, the family I'm a part of, is one that breaks down every dividing line in the world. And that's agape. That is the love of God shared between all kinds of people. And it just gave me so much hope and reminded me, man, we're a part of a special community together. And so, yeah, I think so often, you know, people come in a community and it's like, well, if you have privilege, then you serve those who have less privilege than you or something. But you came into a community and you said, what do I have to give? I'm going to share it. And you singled me out and shared it with me. And that's the most beautiful picture of the church I've ever gotten to experience. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for letting me. I didn't think I was going to be able to get you guys to come for this dinner.
Well, I'm glad we did. I love you, Jazz.
I love you too.
Peace. So I'm here with a very familiar face, Mr. Simon Morris, and I'm here to ask him to recollect his version of a story that makes its way into this book, Searching for Enough. And that's because the main thing I want to share as a part of this book launch event is that this book is not my story being shared with the broader church. It is our story as Oak Church Brooklyn being shared with the broader church. And so this book is just peppered with the stories of people from the life of this community. And one that stands out in particular that is near the beginning of the book is a day that Simon and I shared several years ago where we interacted with the whole breadth of what it is to participate in a church community in a single day, the mourning of loss and the celebration of new life in a day. And so this was the day that Jason Wilshusen was lost. And it was the day that we celebrated your son Louis's 3rd birthday, Simon. So I can remember traveling back to New York on that day and landing and having 11 missed calls from the same number. It was Yvette, Jason's mom, and checking my voicemail and getting the news that she had lost her son. What do you remember from that day?
Yeah, I was in Costco, coming out of Costco basically with the kids, and yeah, got a text from Yvette to call her, and called her, you know, obviously right back, and just again that sort of, you know, in the middle of a very routine like shopping trip, just like being totally floored by what she was saying. Jason was like, I love Jason so much, you know, like when I first came to the church, I remember just seeing him. We used to have a sort of sofa back at the back of church, and he was sitting there kind of looking a little disengaged. And I remember just sitting with him and just chatting to him, and we became good friends. We had play dates with our kids, and we got to know each other pretty well. And it just I couldn't believe that someone, you know, just yeah, someone so alive in so many ways as Jason was. His personality, he had such an amazing personality. He was a rapper, he was a writer, he was such a gifted guy, wasn't around anymore. And yeah, it was just like driving fast home from Costco, getting on my bike and just going over to Yvette's house as soon as I could.
Yeah, I can remember actually you and I biking together. I remember biking like right behind you in the bike lane down Manhattan Ave. Actually, there isn't a bike lane there, biking down Manhattan Ave to get there. And yeah, I can remember sitting at that kitchen table for a long time. We got there in the morning. At some point, we got some pizza and sat there and passed paper plates around and just grieved. We were actually there for quite some time when Jason's body was still there, lying on the couch in the living room. But I don't know if you recall this, but there were so many people from our community that came in and out of that house. There were so many people that had heard and wanted to come and just weep with Robbie and Yvette and Rob and Yvonne and Billy and the whole family that was there weeping. What do you remember about that bit?
I just remember sitting at that table, and like you said, with Jason's body sort of covered in a blanket on the couch, like right there next to us. But it just felt like just being there was what we needed to do, and just sitting there and not going anywhere. And we prayed. There was a moment I definitely remember we prayed, and the Betts whole family, of course, loved Jesus so much and was so wanting to pray. But more than that, I remember just sitting and crying a lot, with the family, and honestly as well feeling very honored that the family would welcome us who weren't family, who weren't blood family, into their home on that day in the most tragically intimate kind of place that we were welcome as church family. We were seen and welcomed in as family to sit and grieve and mourn with them.
Yeah. And then in that late afternoon, we were together again. We probably were apart for maybe a half hour in between, but we were together again for your son's birthday party that had been planned, a month out or something like that, just happened to fall on the same day. And I remember being on your rooftop of your apartment there, like near the East River. And I personally can remember having this moment looking around and seeing the same community, some of the same people I had seen grieving and some different, but together laughing and celebrating the life of Louis, and our kids running around, and it was like, as dark as it was there, it was teeming with life here. And just the juxtaposition of those two pictures held right up against each other on a single day. What stands out when you think about, I think it was Louis' third birthday. So when you think about your younger son's third birthday party, what stands out to you?
Yeah. I mean, it was surreal and very strange. Like, I definitely obviously was engaged with the party, it's my son and he was super cute and, all that stuff. But it was definitely, I felt like I was kind of, floating above the scene, if you like it was very strange to sort of be in that environment after just sort of sitting with Yvette and her family, and also just Jason's own daughter Ariella being around the same age as Teddy, our older son. And I mean, she wasn't in New York at the time, everything, she was out of the city, which we're all like very grateful for that she wasn't there. But just those thoughts of like, okay, like here we are, with our kids, but there's a little girl out there who just lost her dad, and just trying to reconcile those things. Of course, still trying to be present as a dad and to celebrate my son and, not deny that, but also just to hold that loss at the same time was very strange.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like life in the family of God is lived in constant tension, between celebrating what is good and longing for, or if you think about the already not yet, celebrating the bits of heaven we get to experience on earth, and just this gut level longing when we know, what, there's bits of the kingdom of God that are still far too far away.
Yeah.
All right, friends, I'm going to get to read you a portion of this. I want to read you the opening couple pages of chapter 15, which is titled, "But Some Doubted." Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." John chapter 20, verses 24 and 25. I thought I recognized him lying there in a pack of homeless men. It was difficult to say for sure because he had one hand on his cell phone more beat up than Edward Norton at the end of Fight Club, and the other hand shading his eyes. He was bundled up in layer on top of layer, the way you do when you're planning to spend an entire February sleeping outside. But there was a kid, a teenage boy, among the men, and I think I know him. Andres. Some backstory will be helpful. I was barely 22 years old when I moved to New York City. My first apartment was rodent-infested, barely insulated, and smelled constantly like the restroom of a dive bar. Everyone who's ever moved to New York without an Ivy League degree, and maybe even with one, has a story like that. I founded and led a weekly youth ministry serving at-risk youth in the Lower East Side, home to North America's most densely populated block of government-subsidized low-income housing. I met Rainey through that ministry. She is brave in the way that seems almost accidental. She takes risks that seem to never strike her as risks, but rather as the only logical step. She's compelling in that humble way you want to be around. She's laid back and fun, and she laughs hard and often. But she's also fiercely committed to living what she believes. That's why she, a single woman in her mid-20s living on a public school teacher's salary, legally adopted Andres. Dre was a boy in Rainey's 8th grade class. He missed enough days to be expelled. He slept with his head on his desk most of the days when he did show up. Most teachers would dismiss him as a lost cause, but he had Rainey for third period, and where most people pull back, she pushes in. As it turned out, Dre had been abandoned by the one single parent he knew. He wasn't sure if he had any other family to turn to, and he had somehow slipped through the foster care system's fingers. He was living homeless in Tompkins Square Park in the 8th grade. Eventually, he was picked up by the police and sent to a juvenile detention center a couple hours' drive out of the city. He was charged with illegally sleeping on a park bench in a New York City park. Rainey was watching all this play out, and that's when she decided to begin the legal adoption process. The process was long and painful, but always hopeful. In the end, the judge granted her a trial period adoption with plenty of conditions, and Dre moved into the spare bedroom she had set up in her tiny Chinatown apartment. It takes a village, right? So Rainey assembled one, and I was part of it. Kirsten and I had a standing weekly dinner at Rainey and Dre's place, and I spent Thursday afternoons with him solo. He had stories that made your jaw drop and others that made your heart heavy. But in every way, he was a normal kid. He had a crush on a girl, and he really, really wanted to make the high school basketball team. We added Tuesday morning basketball drills to our weekly hangouts, 6 a.m. at the Chinatown Y. He was an early riser, still on the incarceration routine. Everything was going according to plan. Dre was going to school, passing his classes, and honoring his parole. He was surrounded by love and support. Rainey had given her whole life, and it wasn't just for a cause or a systemic problem. It was for this one single kid. It was breathtaking. Then he ran away. "Tyler, are you with Dre? He hasn't come home." Rainey had called me looking for him. One ordinary day after school, Dre never came home. There were no warning signs, no withdrawal. He was just gone. The police found his parole-issued ankle bracelet used for tracking his location somehow broken off and removed. Several days went by so slowly that it was almost unbearable. Then, about 96 hours after disappearing, he just showed up at Rainey's place. When the prodigal son comes back home with his tail tucked between his legs, the father forgives him without an explanation and throws the kind of party you talk about for weeks. We decided this model is worth following. Rainey gathered Dre's village, and we killed the fattened calf, which if you live in Manhattan, means we let Dre choose the restaurant. I've always wanted to eat at Olive Garden. Really? You know we're on an island that renowned chefs come to from all over the world, and we're giving you free pick of anywhere to eat, right? I've always wanted to eat at Olive Garden. That's how we ended up at a table on 23rd Street with bottomless breadsticks. It was the kind of night you never forget. Ragamuffin holiness. The way I imagine it felt to have dinner with Jesus. We had the time of our lives, but we could also feel the weight of something truly transcendent hanging over our table. Not long after that night, Dre was gone again. Didn't come home from school, picked up by the cops, no second chances this time. Out of Rainey's legal custody, property of New York State. Out of the bottom bunk in Rainey's tiny spare bedroom and back to the bottom bunk of a cell in that familiar juvenile detention center. I never got to see him again, never got to understand, never got to say goodbye. Fast forward about 3 years. There's a kid, a teenage boy, lying there among the men. And I think I know him. It's Dre. A patchy, scraggly beard covers his boyish face, but it's Dre. I'm in Tompkins Square Park, the park with a global reputation for heroin at the heart of Alphabet City, where he used to sleep at night as an 8th grader. I walked over. Dre, is that you? Yo, what's up, Ty? What are you doing here, man? Are you out of juvie? Are you okay? Are you hungry? The last question is the only one he answered. He ate a couple of pepperoni slices faster than I've ever seen anyone do it while I peppered him with questions. He was 18 now, homeless, sleeping on that familiar park bench, the only place that really felt like home. His company was a group of homeless addicts 2 or 3 times his age. I offered him my apartment, couch to sleep on, a shower, even a spare key. He didn't want any of it. He was happy to see me, but he didn't want my help. Doubt. I can still remember exactly how it felt to walk home that day. With very little effort, I'm walking those routine steps across Tompkins Square Park, taking in the familiar signature scent of dog poop and weed and who knows what else blending in the air. People are passing me everywhere, but I'm staring straight ahead, looking right through every last one of them into the hazy, gray winter afternoon. For once, I didn't have anyone listening to my prayer. No need to clean it up or make it come to a resolution in the end for the congregation. I was mumbling to God, being honest about the facts, not forcing them into my tidy little framework. Why, God? How, God? Are you there, God? Because if you are, you've got a lot of explaining to do on this one. He's just a kid. How could you watch this happen? It's one thing to lob impersonal accusations at God from a safe distance, like, what kind of God would stand by while the Holocaust happened? It's another thing entirely for those accusations to become so personal that they intrude into your world, crashing into your ribcage with such force that they put you on your back. That's what doubt feels like. Typically, doubt doesn't feel like an existential question posed by your philosophy professor, a question that your local pastor has an underwhelming answer for. Doubt is an experience in the world you can't reconcile with the story you believe. And that is exactly what was happening to me. The pastor on his day off, suddenly suffocated by doubt. Doubt is not, I've got a few questions that I'm going to need satisfactorily ironed out before I can commit to this set of ideas. Doubt is, why, God? How dare you, God? Are you even there, God? And if you are, if this is how you run things, do I even care to know you, God? Tyler? What are you doing? It was Kirsten. I was standing in front of our apartment door, hand in my pocket, gripping my keys but not moving. I wasn't sure how long I'd been there. I just had a slice of pizza with Dre. I don't remember what I said after that. It wasn't anywhere near coherent. Not yet, anyway. Doubt, the church's greatest fear. The church of our day gets pretty nervous around doubt. Remember what Thomas said? Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hands into his side, I will not believe. That's how Thomas responded to the resurrection rumor that his closest friends excitedly shared with him. I wonder how this response would fly in most of our churches. I've attended more church services than I can count and sat in who knows how many church-based small groups, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard doubt addressed head on or heard anyone voice doubt among the believing. But I've heard story after story of those riddled with silent doubt who were unable to find the space to bring it into the open until one day they walked out the door and took the doubt conversation somewhere other than the church. I've heard every confession under the sun. There's almost nothing that can surprise me a decade into pastoring New Yorkers. I pastor a church in one of the most post-Christian environments on the globe, where a spirituality that survives the city is often falsely viewed as a victory for Christians. And still, even here, I've heard doubt confessed just 3 times in my conscious memory. 3 times in 10 years. I wonder if our communities have the space available to be as honest as Thomas was. I wonder if we honor one another and trust God enough to let the question fill the air without puncturing a gut-level question with an oversimplified, head-level response. I wonder if the Bible makes more room for God to meet people in the midst of doubt than the communities that are formed around that very same Bible. Most importantly, what do we make of a God who, spoiler alert, met Thomas in the midst of his doubt? This is a God who wasn't offended by this doubt, but who drew near, making his presence known in the midst of doubt, responding to Thomas's honest rant like it was an invitation. One of the Bible's most famous passages is found at the very end of Matthew's Gospel. The Great Commission is a favorite go-to passage for most preachers. The vast majority of churchgoers will have heard it enough to recite it or get close. The resurrected Jesus gathers his disciples one more time on the Mount of Olives. He's a master leader, creating a moment, bringing them back to that familiar place they've shared so many defining moments. The Messiah meeting his ragtag band of followers in the location that's sure to drag back up to the surface the full context of their individual stories, the hope and the pain, the miracles and the disappointments, the triumphs and the failures, all of it. Then, when the weight of the moment is almost buckling every knee, he says it. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. The king hands off the keys to the everlasting kingdom to his apprentices. What a moment! But of all the times I've heard this passage talked about, and all the different preachers I've heard explain it, every single time, without fail, they've conveniently sidestepped a pretty crucial line that immediately precedes those famous words. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. And to a group that included some men and women full of belief and hope and others riddled with doubt and uncertainty, Jesus says, here's my name, reputation, power, and kingdom. It's yours to give the world now. What does it tell us about the heart of God that he put the keys to the kingdom in the shaky hands of people who were something less than certain? That he looks the doubter in the eye and says, not at some future point when you get every intellectual quibble sorted and every question answered, but right now in the midst of your doubt, I choose you, I trust you, I send you. Apparently, Jesus was much more comfortable with doubt than most churches are.
Okay, friends, so the great news is that, as Carlos said earlier, we as Tithers Church family at Oaks Church Brooklyn have a chance to purchase an advance copy of the book a month ahead of it being released to the wider public. And we have 500 of those copies that we would really love to sell within our church family and within our spheres of influence. So if you go to our website, oaksbk.church/book, you will have an opportunity from tonight to buy a book for yourself. And if you have the resources to do so, I'd really love to encourage you to prayerfully consider a friend or a family member who might benefit from reading what's inside this book. If you do it through our site, you'll pay $20 total. That's $15 for the book itself and $7 for shipping and processing. But the great news is about that is that $9.30 of that amount is going to go directly to our Justice Fund, which, as Carla said earlier, that funds things like our food pantry and our community renewal project. If you buy it later through Amazon, your money's not going to go to the Justice Fund, so we would really love to encourage you to buy an advance copy. Essentially, it means that Tyler and Zondervan, the publishing company, are forfeiting the profits to those books. So really, we really want to be able to use that money to just continue to love our neighbors really well. So please buy a book. Please just join us in supporting and championing this book going out into the world.